Ethan Cole was used to long, tiring days. As a single dad, he had learned to balance work, house chores, and caring for his 7-year-old son, Mason. Most days, he drove home with a mix of exhaustion and quiet pride, knowing he was doing his best. But today felt different from the moment dark clouds had gathered low over the town. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a deep shade of gray. The weather report had mentioned a chance of rain, but no one expected the huge storm that followed. The wind pushed against the buildings as if it wanted to tear them apart, and rain began to fall in thick, heavy sheets. Drivers turned on their headlights early, trying to see through the blur of water sliding down their windshields. Ethan tapped his fingers on the steering wheel as his truck crawled forward. The streets were shiny and slick, and puddles were forming faster than the drains could swallow them. The wipers moved back and forth in a frantic rhythm, but they still couldn't clear the window completely. He sighed. He had planned to pick up takeout on the way home, but now he just wanted to reach the house safely. Mason would be waiting, probably playing with his toy cars or drawing pictures like he always did. Ethan hoped he wasn't scared of the storm. His son had never liked loud thunder. As he approached a long stretch of road with almost no houses, lightning flashed in the distance, lighting up the sky for a split second. The thunder that followed was deep and rolling, like the sky was growling. Ethan gripped the wheel a little tighter and drove slower. It was then, during one of those brief flashes of light, that he noticed something on the sidewalk. At first, he thought it was just trash blown there by the wind, maybe an old box or a tipped-over cart. But as his truck moved closer, the shape became clearer, though still blurred by the storm. It looked like a wheelchair. A wheelchair? Out here? In this weather? He leaned forward, squinting through the rain. His heart gave a quick, sharp jolt. The wheelchair wasn't empty. A small figure was sitting in it. Ethan slowed the truck immediately, turning down the music without thinking. The storm was too loud to hear anything else, but he did it anyway. "No way," he whispered to himself. "Is that a child?" The wind gusted again, making the wheelchair shake slightly. The figure, definitely a child, had both hands curled tightly around the armrests. The girl wasn't moving, not waving, not calling for help. She just sat there, completely drenched, the rain pouring down her small frame. Ethan's heart hammered now, every instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. He checked the road behind him, empty. Without hesitation, he pulled over and switched on the emergency lights. The moment he opened the truck door, the wind almost pushed it back against him. Rain hit his face so hard it felt like tiny stings. The air was cold, the kind that made his skin prickle. He rushed toward the sidewalk, his clothes soaking through instantly. "Hey!" he called out, trying to raise his voice over the storm. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't answer. She didn't even look up. Her shoulders were hunched, and her thin jacket clung tightly to her arms. The wheels of the chair were half submerged in a puddle. When he reached her, Ethan crouched down slightly so he wouldn't seem scary. Up close, he could finally see her face. She looked around 10 years old, with soft features and big eyes that were now red and watery, not just from the rain, but from fear. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheeks, and she was trembling, not violently but steadily, like someone trying to hold herself together. "Hey," he said gently, keeping his voice calm. "It's okay. I'm here to help. Are you hurt?" She shook her head a little, but still said nothing. Her eyes darted to the empty street, then back to him, as if she were afraid of something unseen. Ethan felt a twist of worry in his chest. "I'm gonna get you out of this rain, okay? My truck's right there." Still no response, but she didn't pull away when he placed his hands on the wheelchair handles. That tiny detail was enough. He started backing the chair toward his truck. The wheels struggled through the puddles, and water splashed with every step. But he kept going. When they reached the truck, he opened the passenger door, lifted her gently — she was lighter than he expected — and settled her onto the seat. She looked down at her hands, silent and stiff, as though unsure if she was allowed to speak. "You're safe now," Ethan said softly, buckling the seatbelt around her. "I'm going to turn on the heat, okay? You're freezing." She gave the faintest nod. He folded the wheelchair and placed it in the back of the truck, though it annoyed him how old and worn down it looked. One wheel squeaked, and the cushion was torn on the side. It didn't seem like something that belonged to a growing child. When he climbed into the driver's seat again, rainwater dripped from his hair onto the dashboard. He cranked up the heat. The warm air filled the truck slowly, battling the cold that clung to her clothes. "What's your name?" he asked gently, not wanting to overwhelm her. She hesitated for a long few seconds, then whispered, "Lena." Her voice was barely audible, as if she hadn't spoken in hours. "Hi, Lena. I'm Ethan." He kept his voice soft. "Do you know where your family is? Did someone leave you here?" She stared ahead, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Someone was with me." "Okay," Ethan said, waiting patiently. More silence followed. "But they left." Ethan felt his stomach drop. People didn't just leave a child alone in a wheelchair during a storm, not unless something was very, very wrong. "Do you know why they left?" he asked carefully. Lena pressed her lips together, eyes filling again. She shook her head. Or maybe she didn't want to say. Ethan realized pushing her too hard right now wouldn't help. He tried another approach. "Were you trying to go somewhere? Maybe home?" She looked out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "No home," she whispered. The words struck him like a sudden cold wind. No home? What did that mean? Did she live somewhere? Was she lost? Was she running from something? Ethan swallowed hard, trying not to show his alarm. He didn't want to frighten her more. "Okay," he said gently. "We're going to take you somewhere safe and warm, I promise." Another nod from her. He could tell she didn't fully trust him yet. Maybe she didn't trust anyone, but she wasn't resisting, and that was something. He put the truck in gear and slowly pulled away from the curb. The storm outside seemed to grow heavier, as if the sky itself was upset by what had happened to this little girl. Ethan kept glancing at her, making sure she was okay. She sat stiffly, shoulders tight, hands tucked close to her body. But every few minutes, she stole a quick glance at him, like she was studying his face, trying to figure out if he was safe. He offered a small, gentle smile each time, and though she didn't smile back, her eyes softened just a little. The drive home felt longer than usual. The storm didn't let up. But Ethan felt sure he had done the right thing. Leaving her alone out there had never been an option. Whatever her story was, whatever had led her to be abandoned in the rain like that, he knew one thing for certain. This little girl needed help. And for now, he was the only one she had. Ethan drove carefully through the rain-soaked streets, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the heavy downpour. Lena sat quietly beside him, her small hands resting nervously in her lap. He could see her shivering despite the warmth beginning to fill the truck from the heater. Each time a gust of wind rattled the vehicle, she flinched, clutching her coat tighter around her shoulders. Ethan's heart ached. He had never seen a child so scared, so small and alone in such a storm. The journey to his home was filled with silence, broken only by the rhythmic swoosh of the wipers and the occasional rumbles of distant thunder. Ethan wanted to speak to her, to make her feel safe, but he also knew he needed to give her space. Some children needed time to trust before they could talk about what had happened. So, he simply kept his eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at Lena to make sure she was still there, still breathing, still present. After what felt like an eternity, he finally turned onto the quiet street where his small house stood. The lights inside glowed softly through the rain, promising warmth and safety. Mason, his son, had probably been waiting anxiously by the window, watching for him. Ethan parked the truck, turned off the engine, and opened the door. The rain immediately hit his face, cold and relentless, but this time he didn't mind. He focused entirely on helping Lena. "Okay, Lena," he said gently. "Let's get you inside. It's warm in there and dry, too. You won't get wet anymore." Lena didn't respond. She simply allowed him to guide her wheelchair out of the truck and onto the driveway. Every step was careful. Ethan didn't want her to feel unsafe or unstable. Her small frame shook slightly, and he instinctively placed a hand on her shoulder, giving a reassuring squeeze. She seemed to notice, because for the first time since he had picked her up, her gaze briefly met his. A tiny spark of trust flickered in her wide eyes, quickly hidden by the natural fear she carried. The moment they reached the front door, Ethan lifted her gently and carried her inside. Mason was waiting there, his small face lighting up when he saw them. "Dad? Who is she?" Mason asked, a mix of curiosity and concern in his voice. "This is Lena," Ethan explained softly, setting her down on the couch carefully. "She's going to be safe here for now. She got caught in the storm, and she needed help." Mason's eyes widened. "Was she all alone?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, but don't worry, we'll take care of her." Lena didn't speak. She just hugged her knees slightly to her chest, her body tense. Ethan could see she was frightened by the presence of strangers, even kind ones. He sat down slowly on the floor nearby, careful not to appear threatening. "It's okay, Lena. You're safe now," he said again. "I promise no one's going to leave you out in the rain like that." She gave a faint nod, still avoiding eye contact. Ethan could tell she wanted to trust him, but the fear she carried ran deep. He thought back to the moment he had seen her outside. No child should ever have been left like that. No parent, guardian, or adult should ever leave a child helpless in the storm. The thought made his chest tighten. "I'm going to get you some dry clothes and a blanket," he said, standing up. He moved quickly to the bedroom, grabbing a soft blanket and a set of spare pajamas. Returning, he wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. The warmth seemed to relax her slightly, and she leaned back against the couch, letting out a soft, almost inaudible sigh. "Better?" he asked. A tiny nod. That was enough for him. Mason, who had been hovering nearby, crouched down to offer a comforting smile. "I can show you my room later," he said gently. "We have lots of toys. You can pick any you like." Lena's lips twitched, almost like a smile, but she quickly looked away again. Ethan understood. She was learning slowly that she could trust them. But it wasn't easy after everything she had been through. Once Lena was comfortable, Ethan decided to call the police and report the situation. Maybe someone was looking for her. Maybe someone had noticed her missing. Maybe her family was worried. Or maybe... Ethan tried not to think of the worst possibilities. He didn't want to scare Lena further. He explained the situation to the officer on the line. A young girl in a wheelchair, alone in the rain, found on a quiet street. The officer's response surprised him. "No missing child reports match her description," the officer said. "We'll send someone to check, but right now, no one's reported a child like that." Ethan's heart sank. How could a child so clearly alone and abandoned not be reported? The thought made his mind race. Had she been living somewhere without anyone noticing? Was she running away from something? Or worse, had she been abandoned intentionally? He hung up and sat back down, glancing at Lena. She had curled up slightly under the blanket, staring at her hands. Ethan wanted to ask her gently what had happened, but he also knew that some stories took time to come out. "Lena," he said softly, "do you want some hot chocolate? It's warm, and it might help you feel better." Her eyes flickered toward him, hesitant, but she didn't shake her head. Ethan got up and went to the kitchen, quickly preparing a warm cup. He brought it back and handed it to her carefully. She held it like it was fragile, her small hands barely able to wrap around the mug. "Careful," he said with a smile. "It's hot." She nodded, her lips pressing against the rim, sipping slowly. The warmth seemed to comfort her. For a few moments, the house was quiet except for the rain tapping against the windows. Ethan watched her carefully. He had never met this girl before, but already he felt responsible for her. He had a child of his own, but Lena was different. She had been left in a storm, alone and helpless. Now she was here, under his roof, and he vowed silently that he would not let anything happen to her. After a while, Mason sat down beside her. "Do you want to see my toys?" he asked, pointing to the corner of the room where colorful blocks and action figures were scattered. Lena hesitated, then gave a small nod. For the first time since Ethan had found her, she looked interested in something. Mason began to carefully hand her a small stuffed animal, and she accepted it, holding it close. It was a tiny sign, but it was a sign of trust. Ethan felt a wave of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Lena was starting to feel safe. Later, as the rain continued to pour outside, Ethan tried again to get her to talk. "Lena, can you tell me where you live? Or who takes care of you?" She looked down at her lap, fiddling with the blanket. No home," she whispered, almost to herself. Ethan's chest tightened again. "No home? You mean you don't have anyone taking care of you?" She shook her head. Her small voice trembled. They left me." Ethan's heart sank. Every instinct in him screamed that this was not just an accident. Children were not supposed to be left alone, especially in the rain, and especially in a wheelchair. He glanced at Mason, who seemed to sense the tension in the room, and the boy hugged Lena gently. She stiffened at first, but didn't pull away. Ethan knew he had to be strong, calm, and patient. He couldn't let fear take over, not now, not with her in his care. He resolved to keep her safe, to figure out what had happened, and to make sure she knew that she would never be abandoned again. As the evening drew on, Ethan sat nearby, keeping a careful eye on Lena as she sipped her hot chocolate and played quietly with Mason. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside there was a small corner of warmth and safety. For Lena, it was the first real sense of security she had felt in a long time. For Ethan, it was the start of a journey he didn't yet understand, but one he was determined to see through. No one else had come for her. No one had reported her missing. But here, in this small, quiet house, she was safe for the first time. And Ethan promised himself, silently, that he would protect her, no matter what. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light over the room. Outside, the storm had started to calm, leaving only the occasional drizzle tapping against the windows. Lena had been quiet most of the evening, occasionally sipping her hot chocolate or glancing at Mason as he showed her his toys. Ethan had hoped that with time, she would start to open up about what had happened to her, but it was clear that this would take patience and gentle care. He watched her for a while, noticing small details that told him more about her than words ever could. Her wheelchair, for example, was old and worn. The cushion was fraying, the wheels squeaked when Mason nudged them, and there were scratches along the frame. It wasn't a wheelchair that seemed meant for her current size, either. Ethan wondered how long she had been using it and who had been responsible for it. Her small jacket was soaked through when he had found her, and he realized it didn't seem to fit her properly either. She had been neglected even in her clothing. Mason, noticing that Lena was hesitant and quiet, decided to take matters into his own hands. "Do you want to see my drawings?" he asked softly, holding up a piece of paper covered with colorful crayon shapes and lines. Lena glanced at the drawing, a small spark of curiosity in her eyes. She tilted her head and gave a tiny nod. Mason smiled and began explaining what each shape was: a house, a tree, and even a little dog he had tried to draw. For the first time that evening, Lena's eyes seemed to focus on something other than her fear. She reached out slowly and touched one of the crayon lines with her finger. It was a small gesture, but to Ethan, it was a huge step. She was starting to trust them, even just a little. After a while, Ethan decided to try again, carefully approaching Lena with a gentle voice. "Lena, I know it might be hard to talk, but can you tell me a little about yourself? Where were you before I found you?" She hesitated, twisting the blanket in her hands. I don't know," she whispered. I stay with someone sometimes." Her voice was so soft that Ethan had to lean closer to hear her. "Sometimes? Can you tell me more about that?" he asked. He kept his tone calm and gentle, not wanting to frighten her further. She looked down at her hands, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the blanket. They don't like it when I need help. So, I sit alone," she said slowly, each word seeming like a small effort. Ethan felt a pang in his heart. The thought of a child sitting alone, needing help and not receiving it, was unbearable. He swallowed hard and forced himself to stay calm. "Lena, you're not alone now. You don't have to sit alone anymore. You're safe here, and we'll take care of you." She didn't respond immediately, but the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease just a fraction. Ethan knew he couldn't rush her. Trust had to be earned, especially after what she had been through. He looked at Mason, who was sitting quietly on the floor, watching Lena carefully. "Mason, why don't you show her how to play with some of the blocks?" Ethan suggested. Mason's eyes lit up, and he began helping Lena build a small tower with colorful blocks. At first, she was hesitant, barely touching the blocks, but Mason's gentle encouragement made her try. Slowly, the tower began to grow. Ethan watched as Lena's small hands carefully placed each block, a look of concentration and slight joy on her face. It was the first time she seemed truly engaged with something other than her fear. After a while, Ethan decided it was time to ask a few practical questions. He didn't want to pressure Lena, but he needed to understand her situation better. "Lena, do you know where you usually stay? Who takes care of you?" She shook her head. "No one stays." Her voice was barely audible, almost as if she were talking to herself. Ethan's stomach tightened. She hadn't just been caught in a storm. She had no one to care for her regularly. The thought of that was overwhelming. "Lena," he said softly, "do you have a family? Anyone who looks after you?" She looked down, her eyes filling slightly with tears. I used to, but they don't anymore." Ethan felt his chest tighten again. He could see the pain in her small face, the fear that came from being left alone. He wanted to help her, to make things right, even if he didn't know exactly how. "You don't have to worry about that now," he said. "You're safe here. Mason and I will take care of you. You don't have to be scared anymore." For a moment, Lena didn't respond. She just looked at the floor, her small fingers fidgeting with the blanket. Then slowly, she reached out and touched Mason's arm, a small gesture that spoke volumes. She was starting to connect with them, slowly realizing that they meant no harm. Ethan took a deep breath. He needed to do more than just comfort her. He had to find out the truth, but he also had to be careful. He couldn't rush her or force her to speak. So, he decided to gather small clues, little details, that could help him understand her situation. He noticed that Lena's wheelchair was old and didn't fit her properly. The wheels were uneven, and the cushion had worn spots. Her clothing was mismatched and wet, and she shivered even under the blanket. Ethan realized she had been living without proper care for a long time. She needed help with basic things, but no one had been giving it to her. He also noticed small bruises on her arms, faint but visible. She quickly hid them when she realized he was looking, but Ethan could see them clearly. He didn't ask about them yet, knowing that asking too soon could scare her. But he made a mental note. She had been hurt before, even if not badly, and that told him something important. As the evening continued, Ethan decided to call social services. He wanted to make sure Lena was safe and to get professional advice on what to do next. The worker on the phone listened carefully as Ethan explained the situation. A young girl, around 10, in a wheelchair, alone in the rain, he said. No adults around. No one reported missing yet. The worker promised to send someone to check on the situation, but Ethan realized that this could take time. He couldn't wait for the authorities to act before making sure Lena was comfortable and safe. He needed to take care of her in the meantime. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat down across from her. "Lena," he said gently, "we'll figure everything out, okay? You don't have to do this alone. We'll help you." She looked at him, her small eyes wide, and whispered, "Promise?" Ethan smiled. "I promise." She seemed to relax a little, leaning back into the couch and sipping her hot chocolate. Mason handed her another stuffed toy and she hugged it close. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time in what must have been a very long time, Lena seemed to feel safe. Ethan realized that this was only the beginning. He didn't yet know the full story of why Lena had been left alone, why she had no home, or why no one had reported her missing. But he knew one thing clearly. She was his responsibility now. He would do everything he could to protect her, to give her comfort and care, and to help her find a place where she truly belonged. As the night wore on, the rain outside slowed to a gentle drizzle. Lena began to relax more, eventually lying down under the blanket with Mason sitting nearby, watching over her. Ethan stayed in the kitchen for a while longer, making notes about what he had observed and thinking about what steps to take next. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he had a plan. Keep her safe, gain her trust, and slowly uncover the truth. He glanced back at her and saw her eyes closing for the first time that evening. A small smile played on Mason's lips as he whispered, "Good night, Lena." She didn't respond, but her hands relaxed, and she seemed at peace, if only for a little while. Ethan knew there would be challenges ahead. He didn't know what story Lena carried with her, or how complicated her situation might be. But he also knew that she was no longer alone, no longer left out in the storm. For now, that was enough. And as he finally prepared to rest himself, he felt a quiet determination settle in his heart. He would not let this little girl suffer. He would find out the truth, help her heal, and make sure that she never ever felt abandoned again. The next morning, Ethan woke early, the sun just starting to peek through the clouds. The storm had passed, leaving the streets wet but calm. He brewed a fresh pot of coffee and glanced toward the living room, where Lena was still asleep under the blanket. Mason sat cross-legged on the couch, holding her stuffed toy and keeping a quiet watch. The boy had formed a small bond with Lena, and Ethan could see that she had already begun to feel some sense of comfort in their home. Ethan knew today would be different. He had made phone calls yesterday, but now it was time to take steps toward understanding Lena's situation fully. He had to learn where she had come from, why she had been left alone, and who had been responsible for her care. Most importantly, he had to do it carefully, without frightening her. He approached her gently and called softly, "Lena, it's time to wake up. Breakfast is ready." Her eyes fluttered open slowly, still heavy with sleep. She looked around, slightly unsure of her surroundings, but when she saw Mason smiling at her, her face relaxed just a little. Ethan helped her sit up and handed her a cup of warm milk. Mason handed her a small plate of toast, and together, the three of them shared a quiet, calm breakfast. After breakfast, Ethan decided to gather a few items that Lena might need. He brought her fresh clothes, extra blankets, and hygiene items. He also carefully examined her wheelchair again. The old, worn condition of the chair told him a lot. Lena hadn't just been left alone during the storm. She had likely been living without proper care for a long time. The thought made Ethan more determined than ever to help her. Once Lena was dressed and comfortable, Ethan called the local social worker he had spoken to the day before. He explained that Lena was awake and seemed willing to talk, at least in small ways. The worker promised to come to the house later in the morning to meet her, ask questions, and provide professional support. While they waited, Ethan tried to engage Lena gently, without pressure. "Lena," he said softly, "do you want to show me what you like to do? Any games or activities you enjoy?" She hesitated, then nodded slightly. Mason brought out some drawing paper and crayons. Lena picked up a crayon carefully, as if unsure how to use it. She began to draw shapes slowly, and Ethan and Mason watched her quietly. The process seemed to relax her, and soon she was focusing entirely on her drawings. It was a small victory, but to Ethan it felt like a breakthrough. When the social worker arrived, she introduced herself kindly and knelt down to Lena's level. "Hi, Lena," she said softly. "My name is Clara. I'm here to help you. You don't have to answer all my questions if you don't want to, but I want to make sure you're safe and cared for." Lena stared at her silently for a moment, then gave a small nod. Ethan stayed close, making sure she knew she wasn't alone. Clara asked gentle questions about her home, who had been taking care of her, and what had happened the day before. Lena hesitated at first, but under the calm presence of both Ethan and Clara, she slowly began to reveal parts of her story. She explained that she had been living with her mother, who had struggled to take care of her properly. Lena's mother had always been inconsistent, sometimes caring, sometimes leaving her alone for hours. Over time, Lena had grown used to sitting quietly by herself, learning to manage small tasks on her own. The wheelchair was hers, but it had been poorly maintained, and she had often been left without proper help. Ethan listened carefully, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. This little girl had been through so much, yet she still had the courage to survive. He could see that she had learned to rely only on herself, and that made him admire her even more. Clara explained to Ethan that Lena's situation was complicated. Because she had not been reported missing and her mother had not sought help, the system had no record of her. She had been living in a state of neglect, not because anyone wanted to harm her, but because no one had taken responsibility properly. Clara promised to work with them to ensure that Lena would have the care she needed and to investigate her mother's situation further. After Clara left, Ethan sat with Lena and Mason in the living room. "Lena," he said gently, "you're not alone anymore. Mason and I will take care of you, and we'll make sure you have everything you need. You don't have to be afraid." Lena looked up at him, her eyes still cautious but filled with a hint of trust. She reached out and held Mason's hand briefly. Ethan noticed the small gestures, the way she allowed herself to connect with them, even in small ways, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility. Over the next few days, Ethan worked to create a stable, comfortable environment for Lena. He made sure her wheelchair was repaired and that she had clothes that fit properly. Mason continued to be her companion, showing her games and drawing with her. Slowly, Lena began to relax, smiling occasionally and even laughing softly at Mason's jokes. Despite these small victories, Ethan couldn't ignore the truth. Lena had been left in a storm, alone and vulnerable. She had been living without proper care for far too long. The system had failed her, and her mother had abandoned her. Ethan knew that he had to do more than provide temporary comfort. He had to ensure that Lena had a future, a real home where she could grow safely and happily. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Ethan made a decision. He knew that Lena needed stability, love, and protection. He could provide that. But he also knew it wouldn't be simple. Legal processes, social services, and paperwork would all be involved. He would need patience, courage, and dedication. He looked at Lena, who was sitting quietly with Mason, holding her stuffed toy tightly. She looked small and fragile, but Ethan could see the spark of resilience in her eyes. She had survived neglect, abandonment, and fear. She deserved a chance to thrive, and he was determined to give it to her. Ethan spoke softly to Lena. "Lena, I want you to know something important. You're safe here. Mason and I care about you, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure you have a good life. You don't have to worry about being alone anymore." Lena looked at him, her eyes wide and filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. For the first time in a long while, she seemed to believe that someone could care for her unconditionally. She didn't speak, but her small nod and the way she held Mason's hand told Ethan everything he needed to know. Over the next few days, Clara and other social workers visited, assessing Lena's needs and helping Ethan understand how to navigate the system. Ethan learned about temporary foster care, support programs for children with special mobility needs, and resources to help Lena feel comfortable and safe. Each step was small, but it built toward a larger goal, ensuring that Lena would never feel abandoned again. Through all of this, Ethan continued to provide warmth and stability. He cooked meals, helped with personal care, and spent time simply being present with Lena. He read stories to her, played games with Mason and her, and encouraged her to express herself through art. Each small moment strengthened the trust between them, and Ethan could see Lena gradually letting go of her fear. One afternoon, while Lena and Mason were drawing, Ethan reflected on how far they had come. Lena was beginning to smile more, speak in full sentences, and even ask questions about the world around her. She had learned to trust him and Mason, and in doing so, she had started to heal from the neglect and fear that had marked her past. Ethan knew that challenges still lay ahead. The truth about Lena's mother, the legal processes, and ensuring her long-term safety would all require patience and determination. But he also knew that he was ready for those challenges. Lena had been left alone, but she had survived. Now, with love, care, and protection, she would have a chance to thrive. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the living room, Ethan watched Lena and Mason laughing together. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment and determination. Lena's story had been one of fear and abandonment, but it was now becoming a story of hope, care, and the promise of a brighter future. And Ethan knew, without a doubt, that he would do everything in his power to make sure she never faced abandonment again. Days passed, and life in Ethan's small home slowly settled into a new rhythm. The storm that had brought Lena into their lives had faded entirely, leaving behind clean air and streets sparkling with puddles from the last rain. Yet, inside the house, something even more significant had begun to blossom, a quiet sense of hope and family. Lena had begun to smile more often, her laughter no longer rare but growing with each passing day. Mason's infectious energy helped, of course. He would drag her to the living room to show her a new block tower he had built, or ask her to join him in drawing colorful pictures. Ethan watched quietly, grateful for these small moments of normalcy. The bond forming between Lena and Mason was remarkable, a bridge between two children who, in different ways, had experienced uncertainty and loss. Ethan, however, knew the bigger challenges were still ahead. Lena's mother had abandoned her, leaving her unregistered in the system. Without legal intervention, there was a risk that Lena could be moved far away to a facility, separated from the home and stability she had begun to know. He had spoken with the social workers multiple times and had begun to explore the legal steps required to become Lena's foster parent. He wanted to provide her not just safety but a permanent home, and he was prepared to fight for it. One afternoon, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table reviewing papers sent by the social services office, Lena wheeled herself into the room with Mason following closely behind. She had been practicing using her wheelchair indoors and was growing more confident each day. "Dad," she said quietly, her voice soft but clear, "can I help with something?" Ethan looked up and smiled. "Of course, Lena. Would you like to help me with these papers?" She nodded eagerly, pushing her wheelchair closer. Mason sat next to her, handing her pens and highlighters as Ethan explained some of the documents in simple terms. Lena listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. She was absorbing more than Ethan expected, and he was impressed by her curiosity and intelligence. The fact that she wanted to participate in this part of his life was a sign of her growing trust and comfort. Later that week, a meeting with the social worker brought both excitement and nervous anticipation. Clara, the social worker, had gathered all necessary information to consider Ethan as Lena's foster parent. She explained the process clearly, making sure both Ethan and Lena understood what was happening. "You've already provided a safe and caring environment for Lena," Clara said. "Now we need to ensure everything is officially in place so she can stay with you permanently. This involves legal approvals, home assessments, and some paperwork. But from what we've seen so far, you're well prepared to care for her long term." Ethan felt a rush of emotion. Relief, gratitude, and a strong sense of responsibility flooded over him. He glanced at Lena, who was sitting quietly, observing the conversation with curiosity. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "You hear that?" he said softly. "It looks like we might get to stay together, all of us, for real." Lena's eyes widened, a small smile tugging at her lips. Mason jumped up and gave her a hug. For a moment, the room was filled with warmth, laughter, and the quiet happiness of hope taking root. As the days turned into weeks, the paperwork slowly progressed. Lena continued to thrive in Ethan and Mason's care. She was eating better, sleeping well, and expressing herself more confidently. Ethan noticed small changes that spoke volumes, the way she now looked at him when asking questions, the way she laughed at Mason's jokes without hesitation, and the little routines they had developed together. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living and growing in a home where she felt valued and loved. One evening after dinner, Ethan asked Lena to join him in the living room. Mason was already sprawled across the couch, his small feet dangling as he played a game on his tablet. Lena wheeled herself over carefully, still holding on to the blanket she loved to keep close. "Lena," Ethan began, keeping his tone gentle, "do you know what it means to have a home?" Lena looked up, blinking slowly. "A place where you're safe?" she asked, her voice quiet but thoughtful. "Yes," Ethan replied, "a place where you don't have to be afraid. A place where people care about you. A place you belong." He watched her absorb his words. "And that's exactly what we want for you. Mason and I want you to have a home, a real home, where you can stay and be happy." Lena's eyes welled with tears, but this time they were not the tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief and hope. She leaned forward and hugged Mason tightly, then turned and reached out to Ethan. "I want that," she whispered. Ethan held her hand and smiled, fighting to keep his own emotions steady. "You'll have it, Lena. We're going to make sure of it." The following weeks were a mixture of official processes and daily life. Social workers visited occasionally, checking on Lena's well-being and ensuring that Ethan's home was fully prepared for her needs. Ethan coordinated appointments for wheelchair maintenance, explored educational options, and even arranged for Lena to meet other children with similar experiences. Each step required patience, but it was worth it. He wanted her life to be full and joyful, not just safe. Finally, the day came when the legal approval arrived. Ethan could officially become Lena's foster parent, giving her the stability and security she had never truly known. That afternoon, Clara returned with the necessary documents, and Ethan signed them carefully, holding back tears as he looked at Lena. "You're officially part of our family now," he said softly. Lena's eyes sparkled. She smiled broadly, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up the room. Mason ran over and gave her the biggest hug he could manage, and Ethan pulled both children close. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt completely safe, completely loved, and completely at home. Over the next few days, Ethan worked to create special routines for Lena. They established bedtime rituals, playtimes, and learning activities that helped her feel secure and confident. Mason took pride in teaching her games and helping her with schoolwork, while Ethan ensured she had medical care, nutritious meals, and emotional support. Every day, Lena grew stronger, happier, and more independent. One sunny morning, as Ethan and Mason helped Lena wheel herself down the driveway, he looked at her and realized just how far she had come. From the frightened, abandoned girl sitting alone in the rain, she had become a smiling, curious, and lively child ready to embrace life. The transformation was remarkable, and Ethan felt proud, not only of her resilience, but of the small family they had built together. That evening, as they sat together on the couch, Lena resting her head on Mason's shoulder while Ethan read aloud from a storybook, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, and there were still challenges ahead, but he knew they would face them together. Lena had found a home, a family, and a place where she belonged. Ethan looked down at her and whispered, "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Lena. You're safe, loved, and part of our family forever." Lena lifted her head, smiling up at him. "Forever?" she asked softly. "Forever," Ethan replied, holding back his emotions. "Always." As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow across the room, the three of them sat together, a single dad, his son, and the little girl who had once been abandoned in the rain. In that moment, the past seemed far away, replaced by love, hope, and the promise of a brighter future. Ethan knew there would always be challenges, but he also knew that Lena's story had taken a turn for the better. From fear and abandonment to trust and belonging, she had found a family that would never let her down. And in the quiet of that evening, surrounded by laughter, warmth, and the comforting presence of home, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. Lena was safe, she was loved, and for the first time in her life, she truly had a place where she belonged. And so, what had begun as a stormy night with fear and uncertainty had transformed into a journey of hope, care, and family. A new beginning for a little girl who had never known that she could be truly safe and truly loved.